Hi, I'm Mark Honeybone from Property Ventures, and welcome to our weekly podcast where we interview prominent members of the investment community along with other professionals in the New Zealand property market. This is a free service from Property Ventures so that you can keep current and learn from some of the best around New Zealand. To check us out, take a look at propertyventures.co.nz. We hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hi and welcome back to our latest podcast. We're starting a series this month on different mentors that you can use and see what's out there for the investor. And we're starting today with Sean Woods from Property Tutors. Now Sean's since 2004 has been a professional property investor, educator, author, mentor and international consultant negotiating multi-million dollar deals. He put a book out and become known as the $15 million man, and we'll probably talk maybe how that sort of happened shortly. So Sean's going to talk about the Auckland market and a few stories of his clients and some strategies on how to get ahead in the property game. He's a bit unorthodox on how he does stuff and how he probably presents as well, so he's very down to earth and says it as it is. So we hope you enjoy the show. So welcome to the show today, Sean. So many listeners have heard of Sean Woods, some never have. Let's just give a brief overview of what you've been doing sort of since the early 2000s when you got into property full time.
First of all, thanks Mark for coming along to Property Tutors today and giving us the opportunity to talk to yourself and talk to your clients out there.
Yeah, no worries.
So my background basically was that I was, prior to my corporate days, I became a real estate agent here in New Zealand back in 1996. I spent 3 years selling residential real estate up on the North Shore. After that, I moved to commercial on the basis that back in the 80s I had bought and sold a lot of commercial myself, approximately around $70 million worth of commercial property that we had traded, and that all ended in 1987 on the 18th of October, which was commonly known as the stock market crash. And of course what happened there was the banks were calling in mortgages from companies. In fact, there were a lot of older folk out there that used commercial property as their retirement income, and a lot of those had never missed a mortgage payment in a 5 to 10 year period. The banks were running scared, and their feeling was that a lot of the companies that were tenants of those particular properties owned by the older folk may go bust, so they actually called their loans in and sent a lot of them basically to the floor. So with the commercial background I had, I was asked to join a company and help them set up and sell commercial and industrial real estate. I did that for approximately 6 years, and during that time I got to know a lot of the top, more so Auckland, but also New Zealand developers that were building high-rise apartment buildings, gated communities, that sort of thing. And because we were selling them the land and all the buildings that they were bulldozing to put those new complexes on, I decided to get into that. So we would approach those developers with a plan for what they could build, what it would cost to build those apartments, what we could sell them for, what the rental returns, that sort of thing would be. So I spent around 3 years doing that. We did some pretty large developments here in Auckland. The largest one we did was 153 terraced houses out in Botany Downs. Back in those days it was just all farmland and paddocks out there.
Yep.
That turned out to be a leaky building, as did most of them, and a lot more out there that probably still people aren't aware that they're leaky, but that's another story with leaky buildings. And then I decided that I was making so much money for these guys selling residential apartments and gated communities for them that I could make a lot more if I was doing it myself. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, the commissions that we were earning through, selling that amount of property were pretty big. But when I looked at the returns that I was making versus the returns that they were making, I thought, well, there must be a better way. So I decided that I would get into residential investment, not wanting to get back into commercial for the reasons that I've just stated. I found that was too risky, and my attitude was that if I was going to invest in commercial and or industrial real estate, I needed to have a huge amount of residential property behind me that could, for want of a better word, look after, subsidise any issues that we may have had going down the track with paying the mortgages, and obviously having the risk of having companies being involved in actually paying you to pay the banks. So if we had an issue with that, then obviously the residential stuff, which is much easier to liquidate and to sell, we could do so. So I chose not to do that, decided to get into residential.
Right.
And being a real estate agent, a lot of people thought, well, being a real estate agent, that gave me a massive advantage over everybody else because, I understood what I was doing. But in effect, those weren't the facts. I mean, most real estate agents operate within a 3 to 5 kilometre radius of where their office is, so they don't understand the market as such as a whole, across the whole of Auckland, and hence they pretty much advise people on investments within that 5k radius. A lot of people that sell residential real estate are not what I call career agents. Around 20% of career agents that are there for a long, long time, whether that be 6 years plus, specifically in a booming market, which we've seen in Auckland for the last 3 years. You get a lot of people that come out of the woodwork and they think, well, there's a lot of money to be made in real estate. So they jump in and they're part-timers and they might work from 9 until 3 and take the weekends off.
Get some pretty lazy agents out there at the moment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing that I found with those particular agents is that they don't really understand the market and they don't understand what an investment is. And what you really want to do when you're investing in property is you want to make sure that the property portfolio itself looks after itself. So what I'm talking about here is cash flow. So what we try to do is make sure that the properties that we purchase, what we call cash flow positive, and that means that after you've paid, your rates, your mortgage, your insurance, all of the outgoings on the property, then it has surplus cash flow at the end of it. And if you own enough of those properties, then it's very, very difficult to get into trouble. If you do get into trouble, you can obviously liquidate a residential property a lot quicker than what you could with a commercial property. So in doing that, I decided that I would probably go and do some research. So I actually attended a seminar back in 2003, which basically gave me some insights into what we could do to build portfolios. And it was a 3-day seminar, so it was fairly long. But my feeling was that if I got one thing out of that seminar that would be helpful in me changing my lifestyle and doing this full time, then it was worth the investment to go and do so. So that's what I did. I attended that in October 2003. I started with one property, which was my own house, and I was taught that what we do is we use the accessible equity within that property to utilise as deposits to go forward and buy the investment properties. So I started with one house. I got a revolving credit facility against that house. So that was the money that we could use up to an LVR value on that particular property of 80%. And the difference between the LVR and what we actually, when I say we, myself and my wife, what we owed on the mortgage was surplus equity that we could use. That turned out to be $180,000. And I decided that I wanted to do it full time. I'm the sort of person that if I do something, I do it once, I do it right, and there's no such thing as can't in my dictionary of vocabulary. If I'm going to do it,
there's no word like that.
Then I can do it. That's what we do. So with that $180,000, I worked out that if I received no income for a year, what would my outgoing cash flows be to be able to operate without an income? And by trimming all sorts of bits and pieces, I worked out that that would be approximately $80,000 a year. So what I did was I took that $80,000 from the 180 and I put that into an account which I used to, in effect, pay myself. And I took the other $100,000, left that in the revolving credit facility, and I utilised that to pay for the deposits on the property and for the renovations. And within 3.5 years, I built a $15 million portfolio. So within 3.5 years, I think it was about 30 properties that I owned, which had a net surplus cash flow of around about $90,000 a year after costs. At one stage, that surplus cash flow was around about $150,000. But what I chose to do was to spread my portfolio across the Auckland market. Whereas when I started, I decided to target cash flow properties only. I chose South Auckland. The reason I chose South Auckland was that there's a big workforce in South Auckland, and a lot of the families that live in South Auckland are Pacific Islanders. They have a lot of kids. They can have 4 to 6 or 8 kids, and they are subsidised with their accommodation through the government, which means that they can pay higher rents. Hence, you can buy in at a lower price. Back in those days, we were buying properties out there for $150,000.
That's right, yep.
Okay, and a normal rent on those would have been sort of like $230 a week, but we were achieving $450 a week, because of the subsidies that they were getting. Once I had 10 of those properties, I then started to buy what I consider to be B-grade type properties in other areas around Auckland. Certainly not your Takapuna beaches or your Milfords, that's A-grade type stuff.
But standalone stuff and slightly better areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Your standalone stuff that your first and second home buyers live in, mum and dad that have got a 1 and a 2 year old. Back in those days, North Cape, Glenfield, those sort of areas on the shore. Point Chev over here, in the city. St John's, Meadowbank, those sort of areas.
Right.
And then what we did was with that, because the rents on those were lower, we then subsidised those from the cash flow that we had coming off of the cash flow properties in the C-grade areas, being the South Auckland. And what I tried to do and achieved over the period of that 3.5 years to build that portfolio was to average the portfolio so that it had a gross return on it of over 10%. Yield.
Okay, there's an average over. Yep.
There's an average right across the portfolio.
Right.
So that would mean that I might have bought a property that by the time we finished renovating it, it might have returned 12%, and then I might have bought another one that returned 7%, and across the portfolio we averaged 10%.
Nice. And
the interesting thing is that when, there's obviously a lot of people listening that were in and or out of the market back in those days, but they certainly would have known that if they owned their own property without that being investment, that they were probably paying something between 8 and 10% interest rates.
That's right, yep.
So, the interest rates back in those days were sort of averaging around about that 9%, which meant that I had to achieve that 10% plus to actually make them pay for themselves. But I did much better than that, and by the time we finished, remembering it was 3.5 years, so the market did change, the rents did go up.
Yep.
That maintained about 12%, which gave us a lot of that surplus cash flow.
Okay, nice.
So that's pretty much the background. All of those properties that I purchased, as in my whole portfolio back then, I still own today. I've never ever sold one.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that question before you moved on to the mentoring. But if you've had just one property maybe that's caused you some trouble or what have you, do you look at selling, getting rid of that property? And at the moment, I'm sort of giving advice to people if I say if you've got a property that's not performing, now's a good time to sell because the market's so hot. But I know some people never sell religiously. I know some people, they sell their little stock and they get bigger and buy the more expensive stock. So your one's pretty well hold.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we'll talk about how we help clients and what we do for them to achieve their goals further down the track. But I mean, certainly, what I was saying before is that people, if they were going to invest in property, they felt that a good place to invest was in the area that they lived because they felt that they understood that area or they understood the street.
Yeah.
And obviously, if they owned a family type home in a family type area, it would never be cash flow positive. So they may well have purchased properties that they were having to, feed anything between $5,000 and $10,000 a year into.
Yeah.
I would rather have 10 properties pay me $1,000 a year than 10 properties that lose $1,000 a year. In effect, I'm $20,000 better off.
Yeah.
So when I built my portfolio, I made sure that I didn't do that. I understood how it worked, and I made sure that that wasn't the case. And that has been the case with a lot of investors. And those are some of the the horror stories that you hear.
Yep.
Oh, don't invest in property. I did it once, and it cost me $10,000 a year, and and the market changed, and when I sold it, I got $100,000 less. If you're buying a property for $200,000 or $300,000, then it's unlikely that you're going to sell it for $100,000 less. If you're buying a property for $600,000 or $700,000, then it's quite likely that things go wrong that you can sell it for $100,000 less.
Yeah, correct.
You know,
that's all good. Again, just before we get onto the mentoring side, just a couple of things. The Auckland market's obviously a big talking point at the moment. You're in the midst of it. Your staff are, and obviously your students are. What's your call? Just crystal balling here, and coming up at them. I know right at the moment those new rules have kicked in for investors, and sort of we're in limbo mode of let's see what happens in the next few weeks. It's sort of how I'm waiting to see what's your sort of call on where you see things.
Look, it's certainly a different cycle to anything that I've seen in the past, and I've been through 4 property cycles. Those cycles normally go for a period of 7 years from the bottom to the top and back to the bottom again. This cycle's been particularly interesting in that. We had the world financial crisis going back 2008, and that basically moved its way all the way through to 2012, and we obviously still have a lot of problems offshore, presently. The world has changed, times have changed. So with the Auckland market, what people need to understand is that the Auckland market in this cycle is probably very close to the first time in any cycle in the last 100 years that interest rates have been as low as they are and have maintained that for such a long period of time. I mean, the commentators were talking 18 months ago that the interest rates were going to go up. I remember commentators talking 18 to 24 months ago saying, we're at the top of the market, sell your properties now, sell at the height and then buy back low. And I do know that a lot of people did that, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of those people are kicking themselves today. So I think if you're going to look at what's going on with the market, you need to understand the purpose of your purchase. And the purpose of your purchase should always be long-term. And that means long-term wealth as opposed to short-term wealth. So yes, we buy and trade a lot of property. We don't particularly look, or I never looked for a property to trade. That's a property that you add value to and then you sell and you take the cash out of it. I always looked for a property that I could hold within my portfolio that would meet the rules that I set for that portfolio, the 10% or whatever it might be. Yeah. And if that property that I was negotiating didn't meet those rules, then it was renegotiate, or alternatively, say, can I make money out of this property by adding value to it and then selling it to another investor or selling it to a first home buyer or whatever. So along the way of building that portfolio, I did a lot of trading as well, and that's pure cash, less tax.
Yeah.
So, we do a lot of that. Now, in this market in Auckland, when you've got low interest rates and the newspapers and everything are saying buy the property market, you've got to get in, you get a lot of what we consider to be complete speculators. I'm not a speculator, I'm an investor. Okay, and the speculators come into the market, and you see it every cycle. They come in, they spend that year in there. They buy property, they don't add any tech value to it whatsoever. I mean, you can go to an auction and you can find a speculator purchase a property this week, they don't do a thing to it, and you find that when they've settled it 3 or 4 weeks later, they then try and re-auction it, or they put it back on the market for 100 grand more than they paid for it. And sure, some of them get away with it and they do get those returns. If the market changes, they get caught out. Now, the market has changed quite substantially in the last 3 weeks, and a lot of people wouldn't know that. And the thing is that if you're in the property game, if you're going to do this part-time and wish to go full-time in it, so that you can get rid of your day job where somebody tells you when you can go to work and when you can go home, then you need to understand that market. Okay, so what's happened is that we've got the new rules that are coming in, supposed to be on the 1st of October. However, in saying that, the banks have already written into their mortgage documents the 30% equity required for an investment property. That has certainly slowed the market down quite substantially in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But we knew that would happen. And I think that the market will, certainly I don't believe the prices will drop. I think the prices will stay where they are. They don't make land anymore. We've got oversupply of people looking to rent and buy properties as opposed to what we actually have within the marketplace. So I can't see that the prices are dropping. But what I do see is that the investors that look to invest, not to trade or to speculate, but that look to invest, are now saying to themselves, well, I can't do so because I've got this blockage in front of me where I've got to put up 30%. We've got a lot of ways around that. In fact, I believe that for the people that understand how it works and the rest of it, then there's probably more holes in that than a fishnet.
Yep.
And that's what we teach people to do.
Yeah.
So we've seen the speculators disappearing from the market, and the other people that we've seen removed from the market are the Asian investors. A lot of the Chinese have disappeared over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Now, it's interesting because I say to my people, as in my students, I've been through 4 cycles. I've seen this before. I've seen it before. This is what will happen when it happens. And that comment was, it's like somebody turns the tap off. It's actually amazing. It's like an ant leaves the nest and it goes and gets the information and it goes back into the nest amongst the 10,000 ants there and it says, right, there's no food out there, let's stop eating.
Yeah.
And that's happened the last 3 weeks. And if you have a look at the clearance rate for auctions in the last 3 weeks, they're very, very low. And if you went to investors that are listening, that may have been out there, putting their foot in the water and having a look at what's been going on at the auctions, will have noticed that when they go to an auction house, doesn't matter which company it was, that the auction rooms are absolutely chock-a-block. And you would have 10 to 15 people bidding against each other. And a lot of the clearance rate was actually going to Asian buyers. And the reason being is that they have a lot of cash that they bring in offshore, so they can actually pay cash for it. They're not interested in yield as such, what their return is on the property. They're looking at moving their money from overseas where they cannot get a return on it. Because, like if you have a look at China, you have a look at the United States and a few other countries, their interest rates are, pretty much 0 or 0.5%. So if you put in, $100,000 into a bank there, you don't get a return on it. So they are happy to put it into property here that they do get a return. So hence the the yield that they're looking at doesn't matter. We've now got problems in China, as everybody's aware. With that has also slowed those investors. Their stock market has gone down, like billions of dollars in the last month. So that slowed them off as well. And they seem to have had that tap turned off and exited from purchasing property. So if you go to an auction today, or certainly if you went to a Barfoot's auction on Wednesday, they hold on Wednesdays auctions that pretty much start at 9 o'clock in the morning, go to 3 in the afternoon. They start with mortgagee properties and then they move their way through B class to A class properties. In the last 2 weeks, those rooms have been empty. Okay, and if they've got 20 properties that they've been auctioning on that particular day, about 2 or 3 of them have sold under the hammer and the rest of them are passed in at either vendors' bids or just nothing's happened to them whatsoever. So we're in interesting times. So the market won't go down, but I believe that people will, because the competition is in, New Zealanders that live here that are looking to do what they want to do to build the properties, portfolio's, the competition is not there as it has been for the last couple of years, which means that they've got more choice. It means that they're going to buy better quality properties at probably lesser price. But the actual values where they are today, I still believe will be retained. So it'll be cheaper buy and it'll be better return. Values will be retained.
Yeah, and you're right. When they announced these new rules, the market was already fairly strong, and of course it just went up so suddenly. As soon as those rules were announced, it just went up, and people, I think, forgot about that very quickly. Where I thought if they went up that quickly, surely when those rules come in, it's got to flatten out again like that. And the market does need a breathing space sometime, and it had it when the last elections happened, and it's doing it right now. But there's just so many factors why it won't fall over in a heap in Auckland. But I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also helped the regions as well.
Yeah, yes.
And it depends on which regions you're talking about. I mean, if
bigger regions and some of the bigger regions.
For sure. I mean, look, with due respect to anybody that may live in Tokoroa or Wanganui or whatever, the returns there are very low. An example, from the last property boom, even up until now, the Wanganui market is around 30% less than what it was. That means anybody that purchased in Wanganui have actually lost 30% of the equity on that property.
I know a couple of guys brought 7 or 8 properties down there and it's stalled them for the whole cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but Hamilton, for argument's sake, Hamilton is, very, very close to Auckland. And in fact, you give it another 2 years and basically Auckland will be part of Hamilton with all the new motorways and everything that are going through there. Well, there's an interesting point in itself. I mean, I lived in Auckland and have done since 1985, but 3 years ago I bought myself a nice big house on 30 acres right on the lakefront at Karapiro down in Cambridge.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done that if I only owned one house, because I also know that if you leave the Auckland market, then you're probably pretty much never going to get back into it.
Yep.
But because I own so much property, I decided to do that. And, it's amazing. People say to me, you live in Cambridge, or Karapiro, which is actually 10 minutes on the southern side of Cambridge. You live there and you come to Auckland to work. And I say, well, yeah, I do. And they go, that's a huge amount of travelling. And I say, well, no, it's not actually. From the time I leave my property to the time I hit Auckland, it takes me an hour and a half. Now, prior to that, I had a lifestyle block over towards Helensville, Kalkopakoppa, and it used to take me almost 2 hours to get to Auckland because of the traffic.
Yeah.
Time you came down the Western Motorway and then, you hit Spaghetti Junction and everything else. If you had one accident, you were history. Now, that's only going to get quicker. As in the time that it takes to get, say, from Hamilton to Auckland. So I see good opportunities there as well. And I've seen that a lot of the best has actually gone down to Hamilton now and they're starting to buy in there.
Yeah, we're getting more and more buying down there with our finder. So it's certainly going there and Tauranga, but Hamilton's just so accessible, as you said, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose another one that you look at, is that you wouldn't go to Gisborne. I mean, Gisborne is the middle of nowhere. It's 7 hours from anywhere. So you're never going to get any growth. So people have got to understand where the growth is and how close they are to the major centres. Yeah,
no, totally agree. Okay, well, that's a great insight there, Sean, so appreciate that. I'm sure the listeners have got a heap out of that already. So you obviously you moved on and then you've been running this beast called Property Tutors for a wee while. And you have a lot of students you're informing and teaching every year. So just tell me first of all, obviously you'll be saying why you need a mentor. Tell us why an investor needs a mentor and tell us a bit about Property Tutors.
All right. Look, the reason that a property investor needs a mentor is that they need somebody to actually hold their hand and specifically from what we do is take them into the market personally and show them what to buy, how to negotiate it, what to renovate on it, give them the target market for who they're targeting if they're going to sell it, whether it be another investor or whether it be a home owner, and to understand the tricks of the trade through everything. And everything means through the financing of it. It means through the structures that they require to do it. I can see that the IRD, for instance, are going to have a field day over the next 3 or 4 years with a lot of the speculators I spoke about before that, one, haven't paid any tax, 2, have done it in their own name, 3 have not claimed the GST and then paid it back, which is highly illegal. And sure enough, there's some of them that understand what they're doing and say, well, I'm taking the risk on that. But a lot of people don't, understand how to structure it correctly. So that's why. I mean, if I was going to service my boat or service my car, I don't have the education and the knowledge to do so. So I'll go and have a go at it, but I'm pretty sure by the time I, drive down the road, it's going to be running on 6 cylinders instead of 8 cylinders, and it's not going to, get the performance and give me the returns that it should do. That's why people need mentors. Now, going to Property Tutors, that's how Property Tutors started. So I had people approach me back in 2008 who had seen what I did and said, can you teach us how to do that?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'll go and think about it, pretty much, because I didn't want a job. I'd retired in effect, and I was doing property sort of like 1 day a week 2 days a week I was playing golf, got down to like a 2 handicap and was having a great time.
She's a dream come true for me, 2 handicap.
Yeah. So, but in saying that, I haven't played golf now for about 5 years because I'm now way too busy. But I don't see property tutors as a job. I see property tutors as helping people to achieve what they want to achieve professionally in the quickest possible time to do so. I mean, people retire at 65, have a heart attack and die at 67. So, I mean, do what you've got to do it now. So I had a choice, and the choice was this. It was very, very simple. It was, do I show people how to do it and physically take them into the market, as opposed to some of our other friends out there that teach people, but it might be over the phone or it might be just sort of like some classroom stuff, which is all well and good, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's very generic. I mean, everybody's an individual and everybody has a different starting and a finishing position, depending on where they come from, what their income and everything else is. And to be able to teach people to do what I did, it meant that I had to introduce them to my area of expertise. I had to introduce them to my systems that I developed over a long period of time. I had to introduce them to the right people when it came to having professional structures. And more importantly, I had to introduce them to the right people when it came to the financing of those properties. Most people, when they invest in property, go and see the bank manager. The bank manager, he sits behind a desk and wherever it might be in Glenfield and says no. And so you leave the ASB and you go to ASB in Takapuna, and that guy says yes. And what people don't understand is, depending on the experience, the seniority of the bank manager in the area, they have certain limits where they can lend to.
And every bank, if they do this, right, they have their limit, and they have so much they can lend out for a period of time, don't they? And people don't understand it. And as you said, don't take no as a no doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Go somewhere else.
Exactly. So we've developed some massive relationships with one particular broker and brokerage company, which people will meet at our event. I'll talk to you guys about that later on. And along with that, we've also have associates that work with that brokerage company who, in effect, private lenders.
Right.
Okay, so what that means is that they're not banks. They studied property tutors in our results for a 2-year period prior to coming on board with us.
Okay.
And what they do now is they will lend to our clients quite often between 80 and 100% of what we purchase. And that opens the doors up to a lot of people that have never been able to see that.
Absolutely.
So I think that in itself is, why you need a mentor. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. No, that's great. So so for so you come along, it's a year. So what is it? It's a year's program, 1 week, 1 day a week. Is that correct? Yeah.
So what we do with property tutors is that we don't do the generic classroom type stuff where you pay a fee and you get 6 months and you come along once a month, you sit in the classroom and they go through certain subjects. They might go through sale and purchase agreement for the first month. The second month they might talk about structures. Third month they'll talk about financing, that sort of thing, and then off you go by yourself. So when the people asked me to do it, the difference was, as I said, is that I physically take them into the field. So I had to make the decision whether I did or did not do that. And the decision was not an easy one, on the basis that I believe that you don't ever have the sales manager selling against the salesman. And what I mean by that is that I couldn't do both. I couldn't go into my market and buy the properties and do what I was doing and teach people in my market to do the same thing. Because obviously I would get the better deals.
Unfair advantage, yeah.
So I decided not to do that, and I decided to take them on full time. So I still do buy property, and including this commercial building that we're sitting in at the moment. But I certainly don't buy in those areas. And I physically take those clients to those areas. That's 1 day a week for a year. All right. So they join the program. They have a year. We spend, 6 weeks in the classroom, teaching them how to do all sorts of bits and pieces before we physically go on the road. And then I personally take them on a certain day, whether that be a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or a Thursday, to the properties that I've taught them how to locate. We physically go in those properties. I tell them how much to buy the properties for, what the renovation cost will be, who our target market is at the other side, what the yields will be, whether it be a hold property based on those yields or whether it be a trade property.
Yep.
That's what we do. And I've got some clients that from the original days that asked me to do it are still with me 7 years later.
Yeah, that's great.
So they've stayed there for 7 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've seen some people that have been, just going to cope the question or whatever, they've learned, however they've done it or wherever they've been, they've learned they've got to buy whatever yield, so much below valuation, and they've just missed out on some exceptionally good deals, and it's happened this year, and I'm just shaking my head at them. And where, if you just brought the property, especially in the Auckland market now, if you brought it in Auckland in the last year or 6 months, you haven't lost. I mean, if it's not the perfect property, you can sell it as a back out, I suppose, not what you're trying to achieve. But you might be able to buy it that 6% yield or whatever that yield is, and or you might have brought below valuation, but you can't do it both sometimes. What I'm trying to say is you obviously teach your people to make a decision. If it's a property that's going to work, they buy it. They don't try to. You have your rules. But I believe you have your overall rules, but you don't have to analyse it to death, so you never buy anything.
Yeah, that's a perfect point. That's absolutely perfect.
So many people lose money this year, and it's frustrating.
Well, the thing is that most people, they overanalyse the situation, and they put in all sorts of crazy numbers and all sorts of bits and pieces, and every time they put it down, they say to themselves, well, I can't buy that. Sometimes I also think a lot of people do that because they're too scared to buy it because they don't know whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. So you're certainly overanalyzing a property. We do things very, very simply, but once again, it's also targeted at you as an individual. I've got some people in my program that have got $5 or $6 million in cash. Yeah. I've got others that have got $50,000 in cash. So depending on who you are and what you want to achieve is what we actually structure for you when we're doing that.
And I suppose by actually going out there on site, helping them out, that gives them a whole lot more confidence and
absolutely.
And they see how to do it.
Yeah, they get to understand the market. I mean, if you're going to do this, that's what I'm saying. You've got to be in the market the whole time, and that means that you don't go out one Saturday and have a look at 10 properties and you go, well, I'm not sure about those, and then a month later you go and do the same thing. It means that you do it, every Saturday, every Monday night or Tuesday. You ring the agents, you put yourself in front of the agents, you put yourself in the forefront of their memory, so that when something comes along they think's a good deal, they're going to ring you and not the next guy.
Absolutely.
So you've got to put a little bit of effort in, but once you put that bit of effort in, it becomes very, very easy because they actually do the work for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's a question. I know you haven't seen this, so you just wing it as you go there if you want, Sean.
No problem.
But you've seen a lot in the last 15 years in property, and like many of us, you would have already felt the pinch, I guess, at the last GFC.
The last what, sorry?
The last GFC, back in 07, 08. So what's the number one thing you've probably learnt through property over that time? And it's not anything you've seen you've been through 4 cycles. I'm only going through my second full cycle. So what's probably one of the most important things you've learnt from property, and maybe you've actually already answered with how you set yourself up before that happened in 2007 and 8.
It's analyse. Understand the market and analyse what you want to achieve in that market. It's as simple as that. There's too many people that run out there and just buy something without understanding why they're buying it or what the returns might be. I mean, there's 3 things that we need. We need fuel, we need food, and we need a roof over our heads. And food's easy. You go to the supermarket. Fuel's easy. You stop at the gas station. A roof over your head is a totally different kettle of fish because you've got emotions. If it's like your own home, you're emotionally involved in the reasons why you're purchasing that. But if it's an investment, it's a totally different kettle of fish. And I see too many investors that become emotionally involved in the purchase of their investment and either do it or don't do it. Do it wrong, lose money. Don't do it, lose money.
Yeah.
There's a fine line in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sean. You've got an event coming up you'd like to speak about. You've got a bit of an audience here, I guess, of investors. So tell us about the event.
All right, so it's the Property Tutors Masters event. We've been running this event now since 2008. In 2008, the first time we ran the event was after I'd already taken on, I think it was about 18 or 20 clients back then, the ones that asked me to do it. So then we decided that we would run events for other people after we'd done the first year on that, and and that achieved the results that we wanted to achieve. I think back then, we got 150, 180 people in the room. The last event that we had in Auckland was in May, and we had over 650 people booked for that event.
Good effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we moved location. So we're for the last few years, we've been operating at the Rendezvous in Auckland.
Yep.
But we moved the location because that just wasn't big enough for us. So we went to the Langham, which has the biggest ballroom in Auckland, and that's what we needed to get 600 people.
600, can they? Yeah.
Yeah. So the next Masters event is in Auckland on Sunday, the 18th of October. I think it's on our website at the moment. We're taking bookings for that. I think we started. I've got a CEO that runs the group of companies, because I've got other companies as well. I think he started marketing that about 10 days ago, and I know that we've already got over 200 bookings in 10 days. A lot of the bookings come in the last 2 weeks, obviously. So Auckland is the 18th of October, and we also run the same event with a good personal friend of mine, and the owner of Property Tutors in Wellington, Steve Goody, and his event in Wellington is on the 8th of November. They're both full-day events. They start at 9 o'clock in the morning and they run through to about 7 o'clock at night. And at those events, we show you pretty much how we did what we did, line by line, property by property, strategy by strategy.
Right.
We talked to everyone about how we funded those and how we can fund properties today. We introduced them to a lot of market experts. And on top of that, we have our own clients who actually crew those events.
Okay.
They don't charge us any money. They want to give back, and the great thing about that is that you can actually physically talk to clients that have been in the program from anything from a year to 6 years, and they're happy to chat to you about their successes, how many properties they purchased, the sort of money they made, what they do with those particular properties. So it gives you a great insight. And at the end of the event, we take on a certain number of people. We interview them first.
Okay.
So we need to make sure that the people that we take on, specifically because I'm operating with them, I need to know that I can work with them, and they need to know that they can work with me.
Yeah, good.
I'm not interested in somebody joining the program and like turning up every 3 or 4 months and then at the end of it going, well, I didn't achieve anything, because we've got a fantastic reputation for massive achievements with our clients.
Yep.
So on that reason alone, that's why we do that. So we basically give people an application and say, well, if you want to apply to become part of the program, then we will interview you for that. So there's no hard sell at the event. We're not interested in hard sell.
Oh, come on, it's always a hard sell.
No, absolutely not. There never has been. There never will be.
Yeah.
And to be fair, we actually most of the time have a big waiting queue for people wanting to get to the program at the end of the day. That's
great. And I like the fact that you interview. That's important, because you want to work with people that, as I said, you want to see people achieve, and some people aren't made to.
We're different to the generic mentoring, where it doesn't matter to the people that may be doing that whether they've got 50 or 100 people in the room. Yeah. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You know, because it's generic. Whereas me, I'm physically taking these people out, and like I say, I've got a great reputation, and I'm not interested in somebody bad mouthing the program because they didn't achieve, because they didn't do what they wanted to do. So I'm going to make sure that, one, if they're going to be part of the program, that they're going to do what they need to do it. Yeah. And on the other hand, I mean, I'm a little bit rough around the edges and a little bit salty, they might say. And if I need to get the whip out, I'll get the whip out. But I mean, that's what a mentor's for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in fact, I went to a mentoring when I first started myself, not long after you did, I guess, and it would just be the monthly meetings, and you go there and you go around the room, and 3 or 4 of us are doing stuff every day, and the same old crowd had never done anything, but they had no one kicking them or encouraging them enough, I suppose, or as I said, certainly never had an interview when we started.
Yeah, well, because whilst I'm dealing with these people on an individual basis based on what they want to achieve, where I'm also dealing with them in a group situation. So what that means is that a group has 30 people in it. So they're not by themselves either. They've actually got another 29 people around them. And those 29 people come out with me on that day, every day for a year. And we have a list of properties that we go and see. And that in itself, a lot of people they form, really, really good relationships as clients with each other, and end up doing JVs together, and all sorts of great things have come out of it.
Great stuff, and it's a good leverage having other people there that are doing well to try to make yourself do well. So
I've got a young guy that joined the program. I think he's on the website. A guy called Elliot, and he joined the program. I think it was about 9 months ago, something like that. He's 24 years of age. I think 24 years of age, and since he joined the program, I think it's either 15 or 20 deals that he's done since he joined the program, and made over 600,000 in equity in 9 months.
Nice.
All right.
I remember seeing that one the other day.
Yeah. So I mean, there's just a perfect example. And this, I wish somebody taught me how to do that when I was 24.
Yeah, same, mate. 20 years ago, early would have been nice.
So 2003, I was like 42 or something rather when I got into it. Imagine what you could achieve if you're 24 or whatever. But in saying that, I've also got 60-year-olds that are part of the program, and their retirement fund was very small, and we've managed to build that out so they can now go and do what they want to do for the next 15, 20 years without worrying about, my pension's going to be $280 a week and I've only got 300,000 in the bank, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it's good. We've already seen that results. Those results. So that's great. Hey, well, thanks, Sean. That's been awesome insight to a lot of areas of property in Auckland and the mentoring. If you've got nothing better to do on the 18th of October, you better go to Property Tutors website and have a look. Thanks very much for your time today. A pleasure, and good luck in October.
Great. Thanks for having us. One thing for the listeners, that both of those events, the Wellington event can only take 300 people. The Auckland event we can take up to 650. I would book in there quite quickly if I was you, because we do get a lot of people that miss out. We can only get so many people in the room. So go and have a look at it and see whether that's what you want to do.
Absolutely. There's only so many people you fit in a room, even in Auckland.
For sure.
Absolutely. Hey, great stuff. Thanks very much. So there you go. There's some great insights on how to build a portfolio during a cycle, and what Sean's done since, and a bit about Property Tutors and the upcoming event. Just to go on from that, we're also going to talk to his business partner in Wellington, Steve Goody, and he's going to give us a bit of an update about what's going on in Wellington, a bit about himself, and then talk about his event there also. So we'll welcome Steve Goody to the show. So welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks, mate. Great to have me on board.
Pleasure. Just before we start asking you a few questions about tutors in Wellington and the market, just so listeners know who Steve Goody is, just briefly, tell us a wee bit about yourself.
Sure. Look, I'm in my early 40s. I've been full-time property investor for around 20 years. Bought my first property investment as a joint venture when I was 17 years old. Just absolutely loved the challenges of property investment. You're always doing something totally different every day. I like standalone property investment, but found that cash flows better out of things like boarding houses, apartments, and small developments. And 6 or 7 years ago, I was approached by Sean Wood to be his business partner and running Property Tutors out of Wellington. And that sort of set me off, and I got really excited about sort of the coaching side of property investment again as well, and I've really enjoyed running that and working with him for the last few years. That's, I suppose, a bit about me, really.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, and the listeners have just sort of heard about Steve's story. Sean's story, and how he sort of built a portfolio, and how he and Property Tutors, I guess, see how you should be building a portfolio. And we might get you back on at a later date just to talk about what you've done, because you've got your own sort of story as well, which is pretty cool, and listener will get a lot out of. So we'll just talk a bit today about sort of the Wellington market, what's going on down there. I was just saying to Steve before we started, things seem to be happening a lot more than it was a year ago. Places are selling much quicker, where we were having a trouble. So what's going on down in Wellington, Steve?
Yeah, Wellington's actually quite an interesting little market at the moment. There's a few interesting things going on. Obviously, we're not the inflated Christchurch market. We're not the booming Auckland market. And I suppose Auckland at this stage, where are we, mid-late September 2015, we're sort of at a point where Auckland's overflowing into Tauranga and Hamilton and, some other locations like that. And everybody's kind of looking at Wellington and going, we're the poor, sad cousin. And I'm sitting down here going, geez, there's been no massive spike in prices or capital appreciation down here. Interest rates are at a massive historic low and seem to be going lower, but rents down here have stayed the same or firmed up slightly over the last sort of 12 months. And I'm looking at it going, geez, for the rest of the country, Wellington has suddenly become a cash flow play for everybody. We're stable, employment's good, there's no huge mass influx of development starting, whereas, you know, a lot of other places in the country, there's a lot of greenfields developments. In Wellington, we only have, I suppose, what you'd call infill developments. Yeah. And as fundamentals go, and I know that sort of Matthew Gilligan from GRA agrees with me on this, Wellington's a good play at the moment. And I don't mind talking to your listeners about it, Mark, but let's all keep it to ourselves, because I reckon this is a great little market to sort of just to grab a few bargains in. Yeah,
well, one thing with that, I mean, it's one of the only, one of the major cities of New Zealand. It's about the only place you can get cash flow at the moment. So you can probably get as equally as good cash flow there as you can in almost Dunedin sort of thing.
Yeah, well, we're seeing stuff that's north of 8% net on a fairly regular basis. You know, I picked up one of these weird, wonderful, unusual properties yesterday that should gross about 17%. And that's got a subdivision potential and a bit of upsell here and there. It's not the sort of stuff that most people normally get into, but then to get that sort of solid cash flow is just unheard of.
Mm. Thanks for that, Steve. You just made Stuart's job a whole lot harder now. Everyone wants the 17% in Wellington.
No, trust me, you don't want this one. But, I mean, you know, I've been watching Stuart as well and watching some of the stuff that he's got his hands on, and it's similar stuff to what we look to generally as well. Yeah. And you know, it's multiple income stuff. It's different units. It's different income streams. It's 2 or 3 incomes on one property, and that sort of stuff. It's more solid these days, simply for the fact that there's no real vacant property around Wellington, the Hutt Valley generally. There's usually not a lot of problem in tenanting stuff out. And, you know, just right now we're getting into that premium time of just before and just after Christmas when stuff tends to be full anyway. So, you know, some good buys out there.
Yeah. You just tell us a bit about the Wellington market. I found it's in these two sort of markets. You've got the city airport, or the city and the airport side of Wellington, and then you've got the lower Hutt, upper Hutt sort of areas, which is a different market again, and I guess where the cash flow is the, I suppose, lower Hutt, Pairua, Wainui, Mata sort of area. To tell us about that, or the different areas.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't particularly like the Porirua, Whitby, Tawa side of town, so to speak. There's a few greenfields developments out there, which means that the developers can flood the market. Plus, stuff tends to move really quickly out there, and I like a slower moving market myself. The city market is uniquely groused for picking up your capital gain stuff. There's higher price points there. You know, your entry level for a doer-upper property is sitting around the $500,000 mark. For anything decent, you're paying $600,000-700,000 just to get into it. Then development costs. And this is why I love the heck out of Lower Hutt, because you know, your entry level price in some of the scruffier suburbs in Lower Hutt sits just on around $200,000 for a 3-bedroom standalone house. We find those on a regular basis. Those can be renovated for 30-40 grand and end up being worth, you know, in the early 300s. So as a buy and hold investor, you can buy something, give it a bit of a scrub, revalue it and recycle your equity so quickly, meaning revalue it at the 300s, borrow 80% against that and pull your deposit and your renovation capital out and be ready to go straight back into something else straight away again.
Great.
And Lower Hutt's always been very, very stable like that. Wainui, not so much, not a huge fan. You can get great cash flow there, but it's got a sort of a negative population pull at the moment. People are moving out more than they're moving in. And, you know, when Wellington booms and becomes worth $700,000-800,000 average purchase price, people start looking at Petone. They start looking at the central Lower Hutt being sort of $200,000 and $300,000 lower price point than that, and they go, hey, it's only 12 minutes from town without traffic. Let's just, you know, and let's get into that. And we've got the school zones, we've got the infrastructure, we've got everything except for masses of available land, which makes a lot of your fundamentals that investors look for really solid, really tangible.
Yeah, it certainly ticks a lot of the boxes for the fundamentals of, I suppose, property investing, and I guess that's what you're we'll talk about afterwards of what you teach and what have you there. But I mean, not going to build any more houses, I get, or like you can only build so many, and the market, as you said, Wellington just seems to have, nothing's happened for so long. So if there's one place that's due, and it's got the fundamentals behind it, it's certainly where you are.
Yeah, thanks for that, John Key. You make us sound really sad. No, but I mean, sorry, going to give you some grief. But no, seriously, but I mean, I'm sitting in Nainai currently on the phone to you, and there's a property on the street that I'm sitting in, and it's a 1960s totally original 3-bedroom house sitting on 900 square metres of land with a double garage. It's subdividable, needs a renovation, needs to be upgraded, tidied up, but structurally it's fine. And that's going to sell for sort of $250,000.
Wow.
And I mean, I would say that would be uniquely unheard of in any town in New Zealand that's this close to such a large population base. And then you look at Wellington and go, well, average incomes are so high in Wellington, and unemployment is, not that much of an issue. You can find work if you want work, so to speak, in this location. And the fundamentals are uniquely good. But then I've run a graph based on Trade Me listing numbers over the last 2 years. And normally at this time of year, which is, let's face it, it's normally spring, but it's nearly snowing here at the moment. As I'm sitting here, it's 8 degrees outside. But normally at this time of year, there's 170 more listings in Lower Hutt than there is currently right now. There's such a shortage of listings here right now that it must create some upward price pressure very, very shortly. I can't realistically see it going in any other direction. Yeah,
no, absolutely, and it seems to. I mean, this cycle has seemed to have gone similar to other ways. Auckland's a different market right now, but it's going to those Taurangas. It's been an extremely hot market in the Hamiltons, and where the next places it goes. So,
and let's face it, I think the government and some unknowledgeable investors are looking at loan-to-value ratios and bright line tests and local rules that the government and the Reserve Bank are putting in place to try and cool the Auckland market, and they're looking at it and falsely assuming that the Auckland market's going to crash or it's going to flatten out or something interesting is going to happen. And Auckland's got these amazing fundamentals as well, and I don't think it's particularly going to do that.
No.
I just think that the boom that Auckland's had is going to flush down through the rest of the country to a degree, and it's going to sort of, bring up the level of a lot of other things. But I don't think that Auckland is going to crash. I don't think it's even going to flatten that much. It could go quiet a little bit for a little while, but the fundamentals in Auckland are there. People want to live there, and you can't stop that from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, there's certainly good buys right now. How long they last for, we'll see, and you can get cash flow in just sort of the Nainai Lower Hutt way, and in town as well.
Yeah, no, town as well, multiple unit stuff, scruffier houses in Wellington. So, some of the problems with scruffier houses in central Wellington are if they haven't been sort of renovated in the last 10 years, it's probably because they're up 120 stairs or something. But the flip side of that is that those types of properties normally have views, outlook, location. And in central Wellington, it's a little bit thinner, but outlying areas, and what I'm saying is sort of Island Bay, Haitaitai, Miramar, particularly seems to be the airport side is pretty hot these days. The Johnsonville, Newlands side tends to be picked over pretty heavily by first-time buyers.
Yeah.
But, the flip side to that is that a lot of investors these days are buying on cash flow alone because interest rates are low, and it tends to make people concentrate on cash flow, and it sort of, I think people will realise in the next sort of 6 months leading up to and after Christmas that buying for cash flow when interest rates are at 4.5% and expected to go down, and it can actually make your portfolio look pretty wonderful because a lot of people have got stuff and they've, and I have to put my hand up and admit, me too, they've fixed at 6.5% going, surely they won't go any lower than that.
Yeah,
And the way to flush your portfolio with decent cash flow is to get out there now, find something at 8-9%, and buy it and fix it at 4.5%, or even better, fix it just for 6 months and see if they do go any lower, or leave it floating.
Yeah.
It could really inject some pretty awesome cash flow into your portfolio at this stage.
Absolutely. And just something that you're part of your legacy, and if we get you back, I'm sure you'll talk a lot about it, the room by room type of accommodation, is that still big and sought after in Wellington?
Yeah, it is, and it's still as misunderstood, I suppose, as it ever was. A lot of people think that you're a slumlord if you've got a boarding house. I think that I think look at it a slightly different way. I think a good quality property demands a decent quality tenant as well, and a lot of that comes down to street and selection of house and building and one thing or another. And also, it's not everybody's cup of tea. It's slightly more demanding on management and one thing or another, but more than happy to roll through that with you at some stage and throw some ideas around on that one as well. I still love it. I think it's great. I think if you can pick up something that's got a 15, 16, 17% gross return, it makes it a lot easier to balance your portfolio. Well, by balance, I mean that if you've got a 16 or 17% returning property that's possibly not going to give you any capital gain, you've also then can afford to buy some 5 or 6% returning properties in premium locations. And I think that sort of, it can fast track your portfolio growth quite nicely, put you a few years ahead of where you might normally have been.
Yeah, absolutely, and we will get you back to do that sometime. I mean, some people think it's a risky, and it can be risky, especially if you don't look after it. But I mean, it comes down to effort put in, result come out of it, I suppose, is what your thinking would be.
Yeah, I mean, I've probably set up 20, 25 of those boarding houses in Wellington, and I could run through a few of them and also run through why I've kept the 5 or 6 that I've still got and why I've traded off on the other ones, and probably give you a bit of knowledge on sort of, I think one of them I've owned for 10 plus years now and run it that way for 10 plus years, and that's what it's about, thinking long term in regards to it like that.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. Okay, Steve. Well, that's some good points there, and good information about the Wellington market. So, in a month or so, Steve, you've got an event coming up in Wellington that follows the Auckland Property Tutors event. Just tell us briefly about that.
Yeah, certainly. Sean and I often put on these Property Masters events. We get together some industry experts from around New Zealand and a couple from Australia as well, and put some people in a room and basically work through the strategy and the system that Sean and I implement for our own portfolios, and just throw an awful lot of light on how our clients are making, great money out of the property portfolios that they're putting together in the market they've got at the moment, and basically give away a whole pile of free information. And then, just when people expect us to put the thumb screws on and try and force them into some sort of coaching program and lock the doors and nobody gets out without giving us their credit card details.
Isn't that what happens?
Yeah, absolutely. No. What we basically do, and I'll alleviate the concern amongst listeners now, what we basically do is we say, hey, look, if this sounds like a bit of you, then fill in this application form, and we actually go through an interview process, and then anybody that's keen or interested in our program can choose to come along and sit down with our mortgage broker and our entity's an expert in one thing or another, and have an interview with one of our guys, and just basically see if you suit us and if we suit you, and whether we're possible to work with each other. And we do, we probably do 150 of those interviews every 6 months, right. And we take on X number of clients from that based on the client being a good fit for us and vice versa. And we find that our strike rate, our success rate out of that event and out of that product is really, really high, because we don't necessarily take everybody on who wants to be in our program. And that way, we keep our reputation for having a good strike rate of profitable, happy clients very high from doing it that way. And I think it's an unusual way to do it. I think that there's been there's other people in the industry and other people that have previously been in the industry who don't necessarily do it that way. It's, I don't know, akin to a cash grab otherwise, but I think that having the right fit of coach, student, and strategy is a uniquely positive thing, and it has to be done that way. I certainly wouldn't do it any other way anymore.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's that's great. In fact, Sean and Steve have both been talking the same lingo there, so that's a good consistency. Steve, you'll be pleased to know.
Great.
Disappointed. Does Kirik Ashley still come along to that event?
Yeah, he does, and he's really great. I really get a kick out of Kirik every time I hear him. For anybody that hasn't heard Kirik, you're really missing out. He's a peak performance coach. He's worked with Olympic athletes, and he's a great friend of Sean and mine and has been for many, many years. And he's he's hard to explain. He's an
He is.
He's somebody you've got to hear at least once.
Yeah, well, if I just to give a wee plug, he's probably the one person in this world that's sort of changed my way of thinking from working with someone to not, and I'm exceedingly pleased that I met him all those years ago. So there you go. I'll give a wee plug. I'll give a wee plug for him.
Explained as being the guy where if you've listened through his entire presentation and you're not, jumping up on your table and pretty excited, then you might want to check your pulse,
Yeah. Well, he got me for 14 months listening to a CD at about 5:30 in the morning, so there you go.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I mean, we get Kirk along and he does an hour on stage with us as well. Sean and I talk about how we've grown our portfolios, but then we also, and nobody else in the industry that I know of does this, we actually bring a dozen of our clients along, put them on stage, give them a microphone, and let the people in the crowd ask them questions, because, some people look at Sean with what he's achieved and go, hey, that's actually unachievable for me, and it's absolutely not. So we put on stage some people who might have been sitting and viewing the event 12 months ago, and we show what they've achieved and how they've done it, which kind of can make it a lot more real for people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably one of the faults, or not faults, just one of the things people perceive about the different mentors is, hey, that's out of our league, we can never do that. So, yeah, that's a pretty good move.
Yeah, well, it's got to be a replicatable thing. It can't just be based on the fact that Sean or myself might have this particular quirk about our nature, which makes us, go and make horrifically endless, cheap offers on properties until one works. It's got to be replicatable,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, great stuff. So if anyone wants to go to your event, where do they go and when is it?
The best bet is to jump on to propertymasters.co.nz or jump on our Facebook fan page. There's ticket sales jumping around there all over the show. Auckland's getting pretty full, so you want to grab one of those pretty quickly. I'm still winding into mine because I'm a couple of weeks after Sean. There's some sort of rugby tournament on or something, and we're trying to avoid those dates. So Sean's middle of October, and I'm the second weekend in November, basically. But jump on propertymasters.co.nz, have a quick look in there, and there's a whole pile of videos on there too with client referrals and a few conversations and bits and pieces. Kick it around. Tickets are about $47, although occasionally you see them on Grab One for a bit cheaper, and the tickets are for two people as well. So you can bring along the husband or the wife or the business partner, or bring a kid along and get them to get some thoughts on investment and property as well. We see a huge different mix of people coming along to these things, and it's really great. We usually get 800 or 900 people in the two events over the 2 weekends that we do. It's a one-day event on a Sunday. We try and streamline the thing and add in as much content as we possibly can on the day, and most people go raving. But if it's not you and you don't think we've added any value to your investing or your thought process, we also do a 100% money-back guarantee on the ticket price. So, if you come to the end of it and say, hey, look, I really didn't get that one key thing that's going to kick me off out of the event, you come and tap me on the shoulder and I'll give you money back as well. So, we stand by our product.
Excellent. Well, that's great. Thanks, Steve. Just one thing before you go. We've got a lot of new listeners here that won't be in Wellington or Auckland, some overseas. What's a tip you can give to new investors just starting out today in 2015?
Sure. Choose a market you like and get to know it really, really well. I did this exactly the same way when I first started out. I started reading all the property papers, hitting Trade Me really hard, and I didn't really make any offers or buy anything until I could point to the property and go, within 5 or 10 grand, I know what that's going to sell for. I think with the market nationwide turning around to being more of a cash flow market than an equity grab market, so to speak, I think that becomes more and more worthwhile and more valuable to have that market knowledge, and not only on prices but on what rent places are receiving as well. And if you can become that market expert, it becomes very, very hard for you to make too many expensive mistakes, because you're not going to be overpaying for anything. And I think that would be the key thing I'd say to anybody getting into this market fresh from now. Great stuff. Wise words.
All good. Hey, thanks, Steve. We appreciate your time tonight. All the best with the upcoming event in November, and we'll get you on the show later on.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So there's some great tips for all you people out there from two pretty experienced investors, one in Auckland, one in Wellington. The funny thing is, it doesn't really matter if you're from Auckland, Wellington, Hamilton, Tauranga or Australia, like the last week's podcast, the fundamentals are all the same. So I'd like to thank Sean and Steve for their time. We hope they have successful events coming up in October and November, and if any of you want to go there, go to the propertymasters.co.nz and register. So have a great week all, and we'll be back next week.